Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
Last week, as we were leaving off, we were studying in verse 24 and talking about the statement that Jesus made there about judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. And as he was speaking about that, it might appear sometimes that things are one way when they truly are another. We know that the main discussion that's going on with this has to do with honoring the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath and not working on the Sabbath. This was the whole issue. It goes all the way back to John the 5th chapter when he healed the man there at the pool and told him to take up his bed and walk. Seeing him walking around carrying something on the Sabbath day, from a physical standpoint, just looking at the circumstances with your eyes, we could easily, as many of them did, try to convict him of working on the Sabbath, doing things that were unlawful. But Jesus said that, we should not judge just by appearance sake, but we ought to judge righteous judgment. And so we should reserve our decisions specifically until such time as we understand the full set of circumstances. Now, I'm not sure with the way the Jewish leaders approached things that would have changed a whole lot with them, because they just saw the outward thing. That's all they were looking for. And even as he explained to them what he did, they were still upset about it. But Jesus here says that righteous judgment is not based on your opinion. Righteous judgment is not based on my opinion. Righteous judgment is not based on how things look, but it's based on what the situation and circumstance and actions truly are. We could watch three people do exactly the same thing, and all three of them may be motivated to do whatever it is they're doing for many different reasons. And if we just judge based on physical appearances and based on what I think about it, we are always going to have conflicts. And I think in the church, this is probably one of the big things. Everybody has an opinion. A lot of times something is brought up, somebody wants to do something, a person gets upset about it, and it all has to do with their opinion. Opinions are something that we highly regard because it's mine. I can't be wrong, right? Never have been. Thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken. That's the way people approach life. And Jesus said, if you just go by appearance and opinions, you're going to have a tough time dealing with people in general. Now, we would teach not, if we were under the law of Moses, we most certainly would teach people not to work on the Sabbath day. This man wasn't working. This This man did not get up that morning with the intent to go carrying his bed around through Jerusalem. But the circumstances changed, and we've discussed that in more detail. But the emphasis needs to be placed on the fact that as the people of God, we should be just a little deeper in the way that we approach situations. We should investigate things. If something doesn't look right, we should investigate those things. And when we see something that doesn't maybe seem correct to us, then look further. And above everything else, rather than opinion's sake, you ought to ask yourself the question, where in the scriptures is this wrong? I may not do it myself, and I may prefer not to do it myself, but is it really wrong? And so we have to be really careful about that, and the emphasis, therefore, is on righteous judgment. We hear people say all the time, we're not supposed to judge. Jesus said you shouldn't judge. Wrong answer. Jesus didn't say we weren't supposed to judge, but he said when we judge, it should be righteous judgment. When a judge sits on the bench and passes judgment based on their feelings or their opinions, and it's not based upon the law, that person does not get justice. No matter what the situation is, justice is not taken care of. And therefore, as the people of God, it is unfitting for us to pass light judgment based on opinions and feelings upon others and condemn them in a way in which they're not guilty of anything. And so Jesus said, you can judge, you can even, Paul says, and we'll talk about that a little later in our next lesson, but Paul over in 2 Corinthians 13 says we ought to judge yourselves, examine yourselves, see whether you're in the faith. You're supposed to be people who know what the Bible says, and you're supposed to be able to take care of yourself. Nobody ought to have to take care of you. That's what Paul told the people at Corinth. If you should be able to examine yourself, see whether you're in the faith, see whether or not you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And therefore, when we're dealing with other people, judge righteous judgment. There are a lot of things that not everybody necessarily agrees with. If you don't agree with it, you don't want to be a part of it, whatever, that's obviously up to you. I see this over and over again, and people try to make their personal opinions a matter of judgment. I have ran into some brethren, what we call the one-cuppers, along the way in our ministry in the last year and a half that we've been going on. And they try very hard to make it, to cause anyone who uses more than one cup, that they're sinners, and they try their hardest to prove that it's wrong, just like they do with classrooms, just like people talk about eating in the building. And again, my issue with that is it's okay to use the bathroom, but you can't eat. It makes no sense whatsoever. They have to go to the bathroom. They don't wait till they get home. They go back to the back of the building and they use the restroom. If you can use the restroom in the church's building, it's not the church, but you can't eat. You've got to figure out where there's something not right there. And so again, judge righteous judgment. Look at the scriptures. What do the scriptures say about it? What is there in the scriptures that may not be exactly the same thing, but parallel it? When Paul gives a list of works of the flesh, he gives a whole list and such like, and these kind of things as he talks to us. And so we're supposed to be people that are not babies in the Word. We're supposed to be people who are capable of dealing with the meat of the Word. And that means that we don't jump to conclusions. We don't just judge people about our opinions, but we judge righteous judgment. Yes?
Before you used to go to Rock Creek, they had another Church of Christ just around the bend from that, and it was, they call them the woodcuppers. Is that wrong to do that, or is it just wrong to bind it on other Christians?
I have no problem with one cup. I have no problem with 2 cups. But if you insist that people have to use 2 cups or a cup for everybody, then that's as wrong as somebody else insisting that you use 1 cup. Because Jesus is not talking about the vessel. He's talking about the fruit of the vine. This cup, the fruit of the vine. And so when he used the term this cup or the cup, he was holding one, I'm sure, or there was cups there. And when he says, drink ye all of it, the question is whether he's saying, drink each and every one of you from this one cup, or he's saying, drink ye all from it, which is the fruit of the vine. Partake of that in observation. And so, there's a lot of things like that. People want to bind it when and that's, again, a parent's sake. A lot of people, if they were to come in the building and see 1 cup and 1 tray there, they would immediately say, well, they're 1-cuppers, or they're the conservative Church of Christ. And I don't agree with that. I don't think you're right. And then they start on to probably a bunch of other stuff that they aren't right about too. And, judging somebody on the instrument that we use to observe the Lord's Supper, when we're all using the fruit of the vine, we're all using unleavened bread, and again, we get into the problem. Some insist that we can only use 1 piece of bread, and Jesus broke bread and gave it to them and said, and so even if we do use 4 plates or 2 plates or whatever, we ought to only have 1 piece of bread on there, and we ought to break it and put it on 2 plates and pass it out. If we don't do that, it's wrong. And so there's all kinds of things that people have opinions about and how we ought to go about doing things. But, we need to be careful. We need to be careful about all of those things. And Jesus, I'm sure, on the day of judgment is going to surprise a lot of people. He even tells us in Matthew 7, in that day, there'll be many that say unto me, Lord, Lord, have we not? And we did this, we did that, we did that. And Jesus said, I never knew you. I just never knew you. You aren't my folk. And I think a lot of that's going to be the fact that people can't, won't, don't even try to judge righteous judgment. Now, we spend a lot of time on this verse, but if we could just get a hold of that, it might help us in a lot of ways. When it comes to the church, I've always said, if I went into a congregation that was a Church of Christ and they wanted to use 1 cup, I'm not going to argue with them about it. I'm going to be a little uncomfortable about it. I'd prefer to sit on the front row so I get the first sip out of it. But again, people say, well, they've used the 1 cup for centuries before we had multiple cups. So again, I'm just saying, if I go to a church and they don't have classrooms, I'm not going to make an issue as to why they don't have classrooms. I'm not going to say, well, you're all wrong because you don't have classrooms. You ought to be teaching the kids. We could just go into all kinds of things. Why don't just go in there worship. If you're just passing through, you're just passing through. Now, on the other hand, there are some buildings that have Church of Christ on it. And if you go in there and you see an organ or a piano, or you see drums and guitars and whatever up front, now we're talking about something completely different. It's a completely different situation when it comes to those kind of things. And occasionally I will again run into somebody from the Church of Christ, which is the Christian church, and they'll brother me this and brother me that and talk to me and ask questions. And somewhere down the road, when I go over to their Facebook page, whatever, to some of their worship service, I find they're playing a piano or they're playing a guitar or whatever. And I realized at that point that, we're talking about some things that, again, to us at least, are not matters of opinion. And so we judge righteous judgment, know when to say when, know when to draw a line, those kind of things. Again, if I went into a Church of Christ on the first day of the week, they didn't have the communion set at all, and we didn't have communion, and I asked them after church, why didn't we have communion today? And they said, well, we only take it 4 times a year, this, that, and the other. It's like, brother, that's not right. We need to sit down and look at the scriptures, because this isn't a matter of opinion. We need to be following the scriptures. Same way as, if they had the collection on Wednesday night, that's not what Paul said. And if they say, well, we have the collection on Wednesday night, because this, that, or the other, it really doesn't matter why they did it. If they had it on Wednesday night, it's not the first day of the week. You ought to hang on to your money. If you have money on Wednesday and you can't keep it till Sunday, then you need to learn how to manage your money better. And if we're going to spend that or waste that before Sunday, then we got other issues to deal with. And so all Jesus is asking of these religious leaders are to judge righteous judgment. And many of the things for which they were condemning others were based upon opinions that someone else, commands that someone else had created, and they weren't commandments of God. They may have had a good purpose. They may have had a good reason for instituting it to protect the people of God, and that's fine. But, it's not a direct command of God. And if somebody chooses to not do that, then this is where Jesus got into trouble. I don't think Jesus was as upset with the Pharisees because they had customs or traditions, because everybody has customs and traditions. His main problem with them is that they believe that their customs and traditions were equal to or even better than what the written law was. And that's when they started getting into some issues with Jesus. If the fact that they washed their hands often, I don't think Jesus had a problem with that. They want to wash their hands, before they eat. If they want to wash their hands when they come back from the market. God knows today we wash our hands because of COVID so many times. In a day, the hand washing wasn't the problem, but the fact that it wasn't a direct command, and they were wanting to know why his disciples didn't do it. They were again judging them as breaking some kind of commandment, and Jesus said, "Your traditions are breaking the commandments of God." So we need to think about that. This is a verse that we ought to hang on to. You ought to, again, some people don't like to mark in their Bibles, but, lots of times people say, we shouldn't judge. You shouldn't judge people. What we should do is judge righteous judgment, and that's a whole different thing.
Take you back to Matthew, chapter 7.
Yeah. Jesus, he wants us to the very thing that Jesus was saying there in Matthew 7 about trying to get the mote out of your brother's eye when you got a beam in your own eye, get rid of the beam that's in your own eye, then you can take care of the mote. And so that's a parallel to this, because Jesus was telling them, you should have fixed your problems. You should understand righteous judgment. And when you get your house in order and you understand what needs to be done, and you're better prepared to help someone else. But, if you just go on your own opinions, everybody, is flawed, and everybody's going to see things differently. And this also has caused, a lot of what we see today in the denominational world. A lot of the divisions have been caused because of opinions and things, instead of sitting down and saying, what does the Bible really say for it, against it, and then going from there. Anything else? We're going to jump on down through here.
Right, years ago, I stopped up in Ohio when I was looking for a place to go to worship. And any house near Madison, Ohio. And I found one Saturday night, it's in Church of Christ, and I went to it. So anyhow, when I went there, they had music instruments and stuff there. So anyhow, I studied, but then I asked, I'd like to have a meeting with the men, after services. And so after services, I had a discussion with all the men and, asking for Bible authority and, different things. And we had a discussion, but then they told me, well, you need to go to Unionville Church of God. So he sent me to a good congregation.
I had the same kind of situation with a family that moved to Hamlin. They had been, they had been introduced to the truth through a Christian church, Church of Christ, and had been obedient to the gospel. I mean, they were teaching and all, but as they grew, they began to notice. The guy said he noticed that, some of the things that they were doing didn't exactly jive with the scriptures. And he would always ask the preacher, well, where do we get the authority to do this? Or how do we get to do that? The Bible says this, that, and the other. And so after some period of time, I don't know how long it was, he said the preacher took him off the side and said, brother, you need to go to the other Church of Christ uptown. You don't want to be a part of this Church of Christ. You need to be a part of the other Church of Christ. And he said he's very thankful that the preacher pointed him in the right direction, because he went up there to the other congregation, and he said as soon as they started worshiping and as soon as they started teaching and all, he felt more comfortable than he had in a long time, because it was more consistent with the things of the Word. And he could see things being done the way that, when he read the scriptures, he felt, in the other place was just kind of, it was grating against, his conscience. But he found a place of peace. As we go down through here, Jesus has been talking to them about their plotting and planning, and he lets them know that he knows that they've been plotting against him. And even some, then said some of them of Jerusalem, is not this he whom they seek to kill? Now, it's interesting because Jesus told the leaders, he said, I've done one thing and you go about to kill me. And they said, you have a devil. Who's trying to kill you? And then we have this other group here that says, it's not this he that they're going about to kill. Now, who's telling the truth? Jesus says you are. Some say they aren't. But then there's these others that say, ain't this the guy that they've been trying to kill all along? And so there is this controversy that comes up. So to put it, just to the point, somebody's lying here. Jesus says, you're going about to kill me. They said, nobody's trying to kill you. And somebody else says, well, yeah, they are. So somebody's lying, and somebody is not telling the truth. And so they want to judge others, but they themselves don't use good judgment because somebody here is willing to lie about it. And I think we know who's lying. We know the leaders have been plotting and planning to do that. And so, they see him. And then verse 26, it says, but lo, he speaketh boldly, and they say nothing unto him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is the very Christ? See, this is what we're looking at, the leaders and the people. And so the people who are there in the temple, they see these things going on between Jesus and the leaders, and back and forth. You're trying to kill me. No, we're not. And this is a guy that we've heard that they are. And so the people see Jesus still coming into the temple here, and they say, he's preaching openly. It's not like he's hiding somewhere over in a corner and sneaking around. He's in the open area preaching, and people are listening to him, and the leaders aren't trying to stop him. So do they really know? Do they believe that he is the very Christ, the Messiah? If he's wrong, and this is what become a confusing thing. If he's wrong, why aren't the leaders who say he's wrong, who could stop him, why are they not stopping him? But they let him go without much challenge. And then some of the people begin to think, well, maybe they already know something that we don't, and they believe that he is the Christ. Now, I don't know if all of them had come to that conclusion, but I think Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of the counselors, probably Nicodemus, and even some others were coming to the realization that there was a good chance this man was the Messiah. And so he was changing even some of the minds, where he spoke with Nicodemus before, back in John 3. And we'll get into that as we go a little bit further on into the scriptures. But the people begin to question, if somebody came into the temple and was teaching something false or that they didn't agree with, under normal circumstances, they would be removed. If somebody tried to get somewhere, if a Gentile tried to come through the wall there where the gates were into the Jewish side of the temple, they would have reacted almost instantaneously. Some said there were plaques that were there to warn the Gentiles that Gentiles were prohibited beyond this point under the penalty of death. And if they crossed through, they would have been put to death right there in the temple. It was the death penalty issue with them. So if they were that strict about where you could be and couldn't be and who could be where and all these things, why are they letting him do the things that he's doing? And so we have these issues. And as they discuss this, and we're going to run out of time again, but as they're discussing this, verse 27 says, howbeit we know this man whence he is, but when Christ, that is the Messiah, cometh, no man knoweth whence he is. Now, a lot of times we would read over that maybe, and we don't really understand it, and we just kind of go on to the next verse. But what we have is a situation here where people were misinterpreting or misunderstanding a prophecy that surrounded the Messiah from Isaiah 53 and verse 8. And a part of that says, "Who shall declare his generation?" And so their interpretation of that is that no one would know his genealogy. And so it's a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of Isaiah 53 and 8, but asks the question, who shall declare his generation? He's cut off from the earth and all these things that we see. And so their interpretation of that is when the Messiah came, no one would know his genealogy, no one would know his family lineage. And we know this man. The argument that was put forth by some is that we know this man. We know his mother. We know his father. His brothers and sisters are not here with us. We've seen that before. This is the carpenter's son. We not only know his genealogy, we know what his father did, we know what he does, and we could just go on and on. But here's another thing. If you have to be careful that, when you're interpreting prophecies and that type of thing, prophecies are prophetic and people don't understand them until they're fulfilled for a reason. There's a reason why Peter said that people had desired to look into these things. People had been reading and studying about the prophecies of Christ. Angels themselves were looking toward the interpretation of these things, which now we see and know. And the fact that Isaiah 53 is very confusing is easy to see in Acts chapter 8, where the Spirit sends Philip over to join himself to the eunuch that had been to Jerusalem to worship, and he's on his way back reading from Isaiah 52, Isaiah 53, as we know it today. And Philip asks him, understandest thou what thou readest? And, you can almost in your mind's eye see him shaking his head and saying, how can I except somebody would explain it to me? And Philip, started at those same scriptures and preached unto him Jesus. And of course, we understand that Jesus' generation, his genealogy is cut off. He had no children. There is no children, no physical children to go beyond that. No one continues his genealogy because he sits on the throne of his father David in the kingdom, and he doesn't have any descendants. He reigns at least until such time as he returns the kingdom back to the Father. Yes?
It also shows that he will be of the tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
So, there you would have scriptures that conflict with each other.
I mean, they knew he was coming from the tribe of Judah, but there's many different branches on the family tree of Judah. But their main interpretation was just, I don't know if they just picked that out of thin air, but it seems as if it was one of those things that had been studied, and their interpretation of that, and that's why you have to be careful with prophecy. We have a lot of people today that go back to Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and many of the minor prophets, and they try to use those verses to talk about the coming kingdom and the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, and they make application of things that were either to the kingdom of Judah after it was returned or the church. And so there's a lot of misused scriptures because they interpret them incorrectly. And so it was, at least it seems, at this time with Jesus. Our time's up.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.